Your heart is beating right now. Not because you told it to, not because you're focused on it, not because you've earned it or deserve it or have reached a certain level of spiritual development. It is beating because something divine is keeping it beating. And that same intelligence, that same living, radiant, uninterrupted divine energy, is not just maintaining your heartbeat. It is available to you, fully, right now, in this moment, through the simplest act you will ever be asked to perform. Mary Magdalene knew this, not as a concept, not as a belief system she adopted, as a direct, lived, embodied reality that she carried in her body and transmitted to anyone willing to receive it. And what she transmitted, what the tradition that preserved her real teachings has carried forward across 2,000 years, is that divine energy activation does not require a ritual. It does not require a lineage, a teacher's blessing, a completed curriculum, or a decade of disciplined practice. It requires your hand, your heart, and one quality of attention that almost no one in modern spirituality ever talks about. That's it. Now I know what part of your mind just did. It just got a little skeptical, because you've been in this space long enough to know that when something sounds this simple, there's usually a catch. There's usually a system underneath the simplicity, a course, a modality, a method that the simplicity is the doorway into. There is no system here. What I'm bringing you today is older than any system. It is older than the institutions that tried to bury it. It is older than the theological debates that reshaped the story of who Mary Magdalene was and what she actually carried. This teaching predates all of that noise, and it has survived all of that noise, because certain things cannot be destroyed, they can only be hidden. And hidden things have a way of finding the person who is finally ready to receive them. You are ready, otherwise you wouldn't be here. Mary Magdalene, one of the most deliberately obscured figures in all of spiritual history, a woman whose real role was buried under centuries of institutional distortion, carried a teaching about the heart that is, in my genuine opinion, the most suppressed piece of practical spiritual knowledge in the entire Western world. Not suppressed dramatically, suppressed quietly, the way the most dangerous truths always get suppressed, not by being loudly condemned, but by being slowly replaced with a version of themselves that is just close enough to seem real and just different enough to keep you from actually arriving. The version you've been given says, the heart is where your feelings live. The Real teaching says, the heart is where the divine lives. And the distance between those two statements is the distance between a lifetime of seeking and the moment the seeking stops. Mary Magdalene's teaching on divine energy activation begins and ends at one specific point. The center of your chest. The place where your hand goes without thinking when something moves you so deeply that the mind has no words for it. That gesture, hand to heart, is not symbolic. It is not poetic. It is a circuit, a doorway, a precise energetic act that your body has always known how to perform, even when no one ever told you why. And by the time this video ends, you are going to understand exactly why. Not in your head, in your chest, in the place where something has been quietly, patiently, persistently waiting for you to turn your attention toward it. This is not a beginner video. You already know what chakras are. You've already sat in meditation. You've already done the inner work of dismantling at least some of what you were handed by the culture and the religion and the system you were born into. You are not starting from zero, which is precisely why this teaching is for you. Because the deeper you go in genuine spiritual work, the more you discover that the most powerful things are almost always hiding in plain sight. The gesture you make without thinking, the place on your body your hand finds in moments of truth, the simple act that your nervous system already recognizes as significant, even when your conscious mind has never been given the reason why. Divine energy is not coming. It is not waiting to be generated. It is not the reward at the end of enough practice. It is already here. In you, specifically in your heart. Mary Magdalene spent her life pointing toward this. The institution that followed tried to make you forget it, and we are here today to remember it together. Stay with me, because what's coming is the teaching that changes everything. And once you really hear it, not with your mind, but with your chest, you will not be able to go back to the way things were before. Let me tell you who she actually was. Not the version you were given. Not the one that got handed down through 16 centuries of institutional storytelling. The real one. The one that was buried so carefully that most people, even serious spiritual students, have never encountered it. Because here is the truth. Mary Magdalene is the most deliberately obscured figure in all of Western spiritual history. And the degree to which she was obscured tells you everything about how threatening she was. In 591 CE, Pope Gregory I gave a sermon. One sermon. And in that sermon, he fused three entirely separate women mentioned in the New Testament into a single composite figure, and then labeled that composite a prostitute. A woman who had carried one of the most significant spiritual transmissions in the ancient world was reduced, in a single afternoon's rhetoric, to a cautionary tale about female sexuality. One sermon. 1600 years of distortion. That is not an accident. That is a decision. And I want you to sit with the weight of that decision for a moment. Because you don't go to the effort of distorting someone's identity unless their real identity carries a kind of power that threatens the system currently in place. You don't erase someone this thoroughly unless what they represent, what they actually carried, is dangerous to whatever authority needs people to remain spiritually dependent. So who is she really? She was not one of the 12. She was not a supporter in the background. She was not a footnote in someone else's story. In the oldest sources, the ones that predate the editorial decisions of the councils that shaped official religious canon, she holds a role that is qualitatively different from any other figure around the central teacher she followed. She is described as the one who understood, not the one who followed most loyally, not the one who served most devotedly, the one who understood, at a depth that the others around her did not reach. In traditions that passed through hands outside of official institutional control, traditions that preserved what the mainstream narrative was actively working to suppress, she is described as the one who received the deepest teaching, not because of her physical proximity to a historical figure, not because of her devotion, though her devotion was real, but because of the quality of her receptivity, because she had cultivated, through what appears to have been years of serious interior work, a capacity to receive transmissions that the others around her could only partially grasp. Think about what that means esoterically. In mystery school traditions, and the ancient world was saturated with them, in Egypt, in Greece, in the Jewish mystical streams that Mary Magdalene herself moved within, there is a fundamental distinction between two kinds of teaching. A written or spoken teaching gives you information. You learn it. You understand it. You can repeat it back. This is valuable, but it stays in the mind. A living transmission is different in kind, not just in degree. A living transmission changes the quality of your consciousness. It reorganizes something in you that operates below thought, below belief, below the level where intellectual understanding lives. You don't learn it the way you learn a concept. You receive it the way a seed receives warmth. Something in you that was dormant begins to stir. Mary Magdalene was not a witness to events who then reported what she saw. She was a carrier of a living transmission. And the difference between those two roles is the difference between a historian and a torch. A historian tells you what the fire looked like. A torch carrier passes the actual flame forward. The communities that gathered around her in the years following her teacher's death. And yes, there were such communities, and the historical and textual evidence for them is real and documented. They were not gathering to study a theology. They were not studying doctrines or creeds or catechisms. They were gathering to receive what she carried. To learn, through direct transmission rather than instruction, how to access what she had access to. And the primary vehicle for that transmission was not words, not scriptures, not ceremony, not any external form of practice. It was the body, the heart specifically, the practice of conscious, intentional presence that begins in the chest and radiates outward from there. This is the thing that the distortion was designed to make you forget. Not just who she was as a person, but what she knew, what she carried, what she could transmit to anyone willing to receive it. Now I want to be honest with you about my own perspective here, because I think it matters. I believe, and this is not a talking point, this is something I've arrived at after years of genuinely sitting with this, that Mary Magdalene carried a teaching that was structurally incompatible with any system that needs to place itself between a human being and the divine. Because what she carried was not a theology. It was not a set of beliefs you adopt. It was a direct, lived, embodied knowing that the divine is not outside you, not above you, not accessible only through the right institution or the right authority or the right ceremonial channel. It is inside you, immediate, waiting not for your worthiness but for your recognition. A person who genuinely knows that, who has felt it, who has received the ignition of their own heart, does not need anyone's permission for anything. That is a radical idea. In the 1st century, it was a dangerous one. In the 21st century, it is still quietly dangerous. Because the systems that benefit from your spiritual dependency, your sense of incompleteness, your feeling that you need one more teacher, one more initiation, one more layer of understanding before you can truly arrive. Those systems do not benefit from you placing your hand on your heart today and realizing that what you have been looking for has been living in your chest every single moment of your life. Mary Magdalene's legacy is not a religion. It is not a mythology. It is not a historical debate. It is a transmission, living, active, transmittable right now, through you, in this moment. But to receive it, you have to understand what the heart actually is. And I promise you, what comes next is going to permanently change the way you see yourself. What if I told you that your heart is not primarily an emotional organ? What if everything you've been taught, the heart as the seat of feelings, the heart as the place where love lives, the heart as the soft, vulnerable center of your emotional life, is only a fraction of the truth, the outermost layer of something far more extraordinary? Here's what I want you to consider. Your heart thinks, not metaphorically, literally. The heart has its own nervous system, a network of approximately 40,000 neurons embedded directly in the cardiac tissue. These are the same kind of neurons that exist in your brain. They process information. They learn. They remember. They make decisions independently of the brain in your skull. Neuroscientists who study this, and Dr. J. Andrew Armour, a researcher who pioneered the field of neurocardiology, meaning the scientific study of how the heart functions as a neurological organ, not just a pump. They call it the little brain in the heart. But even that undersells it, because the heart also generates an electromagnetic field that extends outside your body in every direction. The electrical field of the heart is 60 times stronger than the electrical field generated by the brain. The magnetic field, measured by devices sensitive enough to detect it outside the body, is 5,000 times stronger than the brain's magnetic field. 5,000 times. And this field is not random. It is not just noise. It carries information. It fluctuates based on the quality of your internal state. When you are in a state of genuine care, genuine appreciation, genuine love, not performed, not manufactured, but real, the electromagnetic pattern of the heart shifts into what researchers at the HeartMath Institute measure as coherence. Dr. Roland McCready, one of the world's leading researchers on the relationship between heart rhythm patterns and human consciousness, has spent decades documenting what coherence actually does to the human system, and the findings are extraordinary. A coherent heart field synchronizes the brain. It regulates the nervous system. It changes the hormonal environment of the body. It even appears to affect the perception of time and the processing of intuitive information. Now, hold all of that in your awareness for a moment, and then come with me into what Mary Magdalene's tradition understood about this same organ 2,000 years before any of these instruments existed. In the tradition that she carried, a tradition that wove together threads of Jewish mysticism, Egyptian temple knowledge, and an understanding of the human body as a sacred map, the heart was not the seat of emotion. It was the seat of divine intelligence. There is a critical distinction here that I want to make very carefully, because this is the exact place where modern spirituality tends to go wrong. The mind receives information. The heart receives reality. Your mind processes what is being said. Your heart knows what is true. These are not the same function. Your mind can construct an argument for almost anything. It can justify. It can rationalize. It can build very elaborate, very convincing frameworks that are completely disconnected from what is actually real. The mind is an extraordinary instrument, but it is an instrument for navigating the surface of reality, not for accessing its depth. The heart goes deeper. In the ancient understanding that Mary Magdalene carried, the heart was described, and this is language that appears across multiple wisdom traditions that predated organized religion, from the Egyptian understanding of the IB, the heart soul, to the Hebrew lev, the heart as the inner person, the real self, as a kind of sacred cave, an inner sanctum, a place inside the body where the human and the divine are not separate but continuous with each other. The heart as a portal, not a metaphor, an actual energetic reality, a point in the physical body where the membrane between what you are in your ordinary, everyday consciousness and what you are in your deepest, most essential nature becomes thin enough to pass through. And here is the teaching that I believe Mary Magdalene brought forward with a clarity that very few figures in the ancient world matched. You don't have to go anywhere to find the divine. You don't have to ascend. You don't have to leave the body. You don't have to transcend your humanity. You have to go into the chest, into the heart, into the place that has been functioning as a portal your entire life, whether you were aware of it or not. Now let me share something personal here, because this specific insight is the one that reorganized everything for me. Modern spirituality, and I say this with real care, because I know that the practices and teachers and systems that exist today have genuinely helped millions of people, including people I love. But modern spirituality has, in large part, made awakening into a mental project. You understand the right concepts. You learn the right frameworks. You read the right books. You reach the right intellectual conclusions about the nature of reality. And you end up being someone who can talk beautifully about the divine, who can explain non-duality over a cup of coffee, who knows what Kundalini is and what the Akashic records are and what shadow work means, and who is still, underneath all of it, operating primarily from the head. That's the trap. That's what Mary Magdalene was pointing away from. The path she taught was not upward. It was inward, specifically inward, into the heart. And what happens when you actually make that journey is not more understanding. It is more being. Something begins to live in you that was not accessible from your head. That something is what we're here to talk about. Let me show you what this actually looks like. Not abstractly, not philosophically, in real life, in the body, in the specific gesture that carries this teaching. Think about the last time something moved you deeply. A piece of music that reached somewhere inside you that you didn't know existed. A moment of unexpected beauty. A sunset that was just too much, a child laughing, a conversation that cracked you open without warning. A moment of real grief, real love, real recognition of something sacred. What did your hand do? Almost every time, without thinking, without being taught, without any conscious decision, your hand moved to your chest. Not your head, not your throat, your heart. That gesture is ancient. It appears in Egyptian tomb paintings, in Roman funerary art, in Sumerian clay tablets, in Greek pottery, in Buddhist iconography. Across cultures that never communicated with each other, across thousands of years, the hand-to-heart gesture appears as a marker of the same thing. This moment is real. This is truth. This lands here. Why? Because your body knows something your mind has forgotten. The skin is not just a covering. It is an organ of extraordinary sensitivity, the largest organ in the body, and it is covered in mechanoreceptors, nerve endings that respond to pressure and touch by sending signals directly into the nervous system. When you place your hand on your chest, you are not making a symbolic gesture. You are creating a circuit. You are sending a signal from the most touch-sensitive part of your hand, the palm, directly into one of the most electromagnetically active regions of your body. There's also this. Bone and tissue have what's called a piezoelectric property. When physical pressure is applied, even gentle pressure, it generates a small electrical charge in the tissue. Your body literally produces electrical signals in response to touch. Conscious, intentional touch over the heart does not just feel meaningful. It is physiologically meaningful. It creates a feedback loop between your nervous system, your heart field, and your conscious attention. But here's where Mary Magdalene's teaching goes somewhere that science has only recently begun to approach. There is a difference, a profound, fundamental, life-changing difference between casual contact and conscious contact. Your hand passes over your chest 100 times a day without anything significant happening. You scratch an itch. You adjust your collar. You cross your arms. You touch your chest without touching it because your awareness is somewhere else entirely. Conscious contact is different. Conscious contact is when your awareness travels down from your head, where most of us live almost all of the time, and actually arrives in your hand. In the point of contact between your palm and your chest. In the beating of the thing beneath that contact. That is when the circuit becomes live. Mary Magdalene's tradition worked with what I would describe as a 3-layer model of the human being. You're not just a physical body. You know this. But here is what the specific model she carried said. The physical body is the outermost layer, the densest expression of who you are. The energy body, sometimes called the subtle body, the etheric body, is the next layer, the energetic blueprint that the physical body is organized around. And then there is the divine body, the innermost layer, the part of you that has never been separate from the source of all things. These are not separate selves stacked inside each other. They are 3 expressions of the same reality at different frequencies. And in most people, even people who have been doing spiritual work for years, these 3 layers are not communicating well with each other. There is a kind of static between them, a disconnect. Touch, conscious, intentional touch over the heart, is the bridge. It is the act that invites all three layers into alignment with each other. Not forcefully, not through will, but through what the tradition called recognition. An act of acknowledgement, a gesture that says, I know what lives here. I am here. I am present to what I actually am. Now there's a specific teaching within Mary Magdalene's lineage, carried in the esoteric traditions that preserved her actual teachings rather than the simplified versions that became mainstream, that refers to what I would translate as the seal of the heart. The idea of a point in the center of the chest, not exactly the anatomical heart, but close, that is described as dormant in most people. Not broken, not missing, dormant, like a seed that has all the information it needs to become a towering tree, but is waiting for specific conditions. Warmth, water, contact with the right elements. In Mary Magdalene's teaching, the seal of the heart opens under three specific conditions: conscious touch, specific quality of breath, and genuine recognition, not intellectual understanding but felt knowing, of the divine energy that is already present. When those three come together, something happens that is not reducible to neuroscience, though neuroscience can describe some of its effects. Something opens, not dramatically, not with a flash of light and a chorus of angels. It opens the way a flower opens, slowly, inevitably, in the direction of warmth. And I want to say something personal here, because I think it matters. The single biggest mistake I see in spiritual practice, and I've been in enough communities and had enough conversations to see patterns, is that people approach the heart from above. They use their minds to try to do something to their hearts. They apply techniques. They run processes. They try to manufacture states. And the heart will not be manufactured. The heart responds to recognition, not to technique. It responds to being genuinely met, not to being managed. This is what makes Mary Magdalene's teaching so radical. So quietly, fundamentally radical. She is not giving you a technique. She is pointing you toward a relationship with the living intelligence that is already beating inside your chest. And that relationship begins with the simplest possible act. You place your hand there. You bring your awareness there. You breathe, and you recognize what lives there. Here's what no one tells you. The divine energy you are looking for, the thing that makes spiritual seekers keep moving from teacher to teacher, practice to practice, tradition to tradition. It is not something you generate. It is not something you attract. It is not something you earn by being disciplined enough or devoted enough or evolved enough. It is already in you. It has always been in you. It is you in your most essential form. And the reason this is so hard to accept is not because it's too simple. It's because if it's true, if the divine energy you've been seeking is already fully present inside you, then the entire story you've been living, the story of the seeker, the story of the person who is not yet there, the person who needs one more thing before they can truly arrive, that story dissolves. And that story, even though it causes suffering, even though it keeps you perpetually incomplete, is at least familiar. It at least gives you a role to play. Mary Magdalene's teaching asks you to give up the role, not to stop growing, not to stop practicing, not to stop deepening, but to release the fundamental premise that you are separate from the thing you're seeking, the word that lives at the center of the tradition she carried. And this comes from a stream of wisdom that predates Christianity entirely, that runs through the wisdom traditions of the ancient Near East, through what Jewish mystics called Chakma, through what the ancient Greeks called Sophia, is Sophia, and the Sophia tradition. And here I want to introduce this carefully because it's important to understand. In the Gnostic cosmology that was part of the world Mary Magdalene moved through, Sophia is not a goddess in the simple mythological sense. Sophia is the living divine wisdom that is embedded in creation itself. She is not separate from the world. She is the intelligence that moves through the world. She is the light inside matter. And the teaching that Mary Magdalene carried forward, that she embodied in a way that made her dangerous to every institution that needed people to believe the divine was outside them, is that Sophia is not somewhere else. She is not in the heavens waiting to be reached. She is in you. She is the intelligence in your heartbeat. She is the knowing that rises before thought. She is the warmth in your chest when something is genuinely true. The body itself, in this tradition, is understood as a living scripture, not a prison, not an obstacle to spiritual development, not something to be transcended or purified or escaped from. A living scripture. Every part of you encodes divine information. The architecture of your body is not random. The location of the heart, central, protected, constantly moving, the first organ to form in an embryo, the last to fail, is not arbitrary. Your body was designed, in the deepest sense of that word, to carry and express divine energy. It is not carrying it at a distance. It is not carrying it in a diluted form. The full, uncompromised, living presence of what you might call God, Source, the divine consciousness itself. It is compressed inside you, fully present, fully potent, waiting for recognition. There is a thread of understanding that predates Christianity, that runs through what historians call the Essene tradition, the communities of Jewish mystics living in the wilderness near the Dead Sea in the centuries surrounding Mary Magdalene's lifetime, that speaks of an inner light, not a metaphor, an actual luminous quality of awareness that every human being carries inside them. This inner light was understood not as something you develop through practice, though practice can help you become aware of it, but as something you already are. You are already the light. The practice is not generating the light. The practice is removing what blocks your perception of a light that was never absent. Now here's why this is directly connected to the heart. In the esoteric traditions that preserved Mary Magdalene's actual teachings, not the simplified, institutionalized version, but the living transmission that passed through people who understood what she was really saying, the heart is identified as the specific location in the body where this inner light is most accessible, where the membrane between your ordinary consciousness and your divine nature is thinnest. Not the third eye, not the crown chakra, the heart, because the heart is the one organ in your body that has never been separate from the divine, not even for a single moment. The brain can be confused, the nervous system can be dysregulated, the body can be sick or depleted, but the heart, the functioning of the heart, the actual coherent intelligence that keeps it beating in rhythm, that coordinates 40,000 neurons, and an electromagnetic field that extends beyond the boundaries of your skin. That intelligence has never once been disconnected from its source. It cannot be. It is too fundamental. It is life itself. So when Mary Magdalene's teaching says activate divine energy, it does not mean build something that doesn't exist yet. It means remove the layer of noise, the layer of mental static, of unprocessed emotion, of habitual inattention, that keeps you from perceiving what is already, constantly, perfectly present. And I want to be honest about something here. I think the reason most spiritual seekers feel perpetually incomplete, and I include my earlier self in this, is because we've been given a model of spirituality that is fundamentally a model of lack. You are lacking something. You need to acquire it. Through enough practice, enough devotion, enough accumulation of spiritual experience, you will eventually have enough. That model keeps you perpetually almost there. Mary Magdalene's model is entirely different. It begins from wholeness. It begins from recognition. And the activation it points toward is not the acquisition of something new. It is the remembering of something that was never lost. Let me speak directly to you now, not to a general audience, to you specifically, the person watching this, because this next part is the most intimate part of everything I'm going to share today, and I want you to receive it the way it was always meant to be received, not as information, but as an invitation. Mary Magdalene's transmission around heart activation was not a technique. I want to be very clear about that, because the moment we turn it into a technique, it dies. It becomes another thing we do at ourselves, another process we run, another item on the spiritual to-do list. What she transmitted was an understanding of a natural process, a process that your heart already knows how to do. And that process unfolds in 3 phases, not steps, phases, because they don't follow each other mechanically, they deepen into each other organically. The 3 phases are stillness, recognition, ignition. Let's move through each one. Phase 1, stillness. Now I need to stop you before your mind fills in what stillness means, because almost certainly what your mind just imagined is not what this tradition means by the word. Stillness is not emptiness. It is not the absence of thought. It is not a blank mind. It is not the meditative state you've been chasing where everything goes quiet and finally, you feel peaceful. That kind of stillness, the emptiness model of stillness, is actually a form of absence. You're trying to make something go away, and the trying, the reaching for the absence, keeps you in a subtle state of effort and contraction. The stillness that Mary Magdalene's tradition points toward is presence. Full, total, unguarded presence to exactly what is here right now. Not what you want to be here. Not a manufactured state of peace. Exactly what is here. If there's mental noise, the noise is here. If there's tightness in your chest, the tightness is here. If there's a feeling you've been avoiding, that feeling is here. Stillness is when you stop trying to be somewhere other than where you are. That's it. That's the whole of phase 1. And it's harder than it sounds. Because the mind, trained for a lifetime to move and manage and plan and analyze, finds the invitation to simply be present almost unbearable at first. It wants to do something. It wants to go somewhere. It wants to be further along than this. The stillness is the practice of meeting that wanting and staying anyway. Sitting with your hand on your heart. Breathing. Not going anywhere. Phase 2, recognition. This is where the teaching gets extraordinary. Recognition is not intellectual. I want to say that again because it's crucial. Recognition in this tradition is not an intellectual act. It is a felt acknowledgement. The specific recognition that Mary Magdalene's teaching points toward is this. The divine is here. Not as a concept. Not as a belief. As a direct, felt, bodily reality. The intelligence that animates your heartbeat. The warmth that arises when you stop and actually pay attention to your own chest. The subtle sense. And for most people it begins as very subtle, easy to dismiss, easy to overlook, of something alive and radiant inside the physical organ of the heart. This is not imagination. This is perception. You are not creating this. You are perceiving something that is already present. The same way you don't create the warmth of sunlight, you simply turn your face toward it and feel what was already there. Recognition is the act of turning your attention to what is already present in your chest and acknowledging it. Not analyzing it. Not trying to make it bigger, not performing gratitude at it, simply acknowledging, this is here. This living thing in my chest is here, and it has always been here, and it is not separate from the source of all things. That acknowledgement, genuine, felt, not performed, is what begins to open the seal. In the tradition that preserved Mary Magdalene's teachings, this phase is sometimes described in the language of the sacred feminine. The quality of reception. Receiving what is already present rather than projecting outward in search of it. The feminine principle. And again, this has nothing to do with gender. It is a quality of consciousness available to everyone. Is the principle of deep interiority, of knowing through feeling, of receiving truth rather than constructing it. Recognition is a feminine act of consciousness. And in a world that has spent centuries overemphasizing the masculine principle of spiritual achievement and striving and ascending, the feminine act of simple recognition is profoundly countercultural. It might be the most radical thing you do today. Phase 3, ignition. I want to be careful with this word because it can make the process sound more dramatic than it usually is. Ignition is not a fireworks display. It is not a Kundalini explosion. It is not necessarily a peak experience of any kind. Ignition is what happens when phase 1 and phase 2 are genuinely, not performatively, present simultaneously. When you are truly still, truly present, unguarded, not going anywhere, and you are truly recognizing the divine presence that lives in your heart. Not as a concept, but as a felt reality, something shifts. Something that was contracted begins to expand. Something that was sealed begins to open. The warmth in your chest increases. Not dramatically, but undeniably. There is often a sensation of expansion, as if the boundaries of your chest are dissolving slightly, as if the electromagnetic field of your heart, that field that extends feet beyond your body in every direction, suddenly becomes perceptible to you from the inside. There is often a feeling that can only be described as coming home. Not to a place, to yourself, to the most essential, undefended version of who you actually are. Now, the role of breath in this process is significant. Not the breath as a technique, not a specific count or pattern or method. The quality of the breath. In Mary Magdalene's tradition, the breath is understood as the carrier between the world and the body. Each inhale is a receiving. Each exhale is a releasing. And when the breath becomes soft, not controlled, not forced, just soft and natural and slightly deeper than usual, it signals the nervous system that it is safe to open, safe to be present, safe to feel what is actually here. The nervous system has to feel safe for the heart to open. This is not metaphysical, it is physiological. The vagus nerve, the primary pathway through which the nervous system and the heart communicate, is directly influenced by the breath. A soft, natural, slightly extended exhale activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the part of the nervous system associated with rest, reception, and connection. And when the nervous system shifts into that state, the heart field shifts with it. Soft breath, hand on heart, stillness, recognition, and then not forced, not manufactured, not willed ignition. And here is the most important thing I can tell you about this process: you cannot force it. The moment you try to make it happen, you have returned to the masculine principle of will and effort, and the feminine principle of reception, which is the doorway, closes. You cannot grab the divine by the throat and demand it reveal itself. You can only be still, recognize what is already present, breathe softly, and wait with an open hand. Now let me tell you something personal. The first time I truly understood what this teaching was pointing toward, not just in my mind, but in my body, in my actual experience, I realized that I had been doing spirituality at myself for years. I had been applying practices to myself like a craftsman applies tools to a piece of wood, shaping myself, improving myself, working on myself, and all of that work was real. It had real value. I am not dismissing it, but it was all happening from a position of subtle separation. There was still a me applying the practice, and a me being worked on. Subject and object, actor and acted upon. What Mary Magdalene's teaching broke open for me was the possibility of simply being the heart. Not the person doing something to the heart. The heart itself. The living, intelligent, divine center that was never separate, never incomplete, never not already exactly what I was looking for. That was ignition. Not dramatic. Not external. Like the click of a key in a lock that you'd been carrying in your pocket your whole life without knowing what it opened. Now let me tell you something that might make you uncomfortable. Actually, it might make you angry. The teaching we've been exploring today, the teaching of the heart as a direct portal to divine experience, the idea that the divine is already fully present inside you and requires no external mediation. This is not obscure esoteric knowledge that simply got lost in the shuffle of history. It was removed, deliberately, systematically, over centuries. And I want to be precise here, because I'm not interested in conspiracy thinking. I am interested in power. Specifically, in the relationship between spiritual knowledge and the institutions that control access to it. Ask yourself this question: if every human being already carries the full presence of the divine inside them, and can access that presence directly through a simple act of conscious attention, what exactly is the role of an institution that claims to mediate between you and the divine? It disappears, not diminishes, disappears. And the institutions that had been built over centuries with extraordinary effort, with genuine devotion mixed with very genuine political calculation, were not going to disappear quietly. In 1945, a collection of ancient texts was discovered in the Egyptian desert near a town called Nag Hammadi. A farmer broke open an ancient sealed jar and found papyrus manuscripts that had been hidden, deliberately hidden, probably around the 4th century CE, when the theological authorities of the day were systematically destroying any teaching that contradicted the official version of events. Someone hid these texts before they could be burned. Think about that. Someone buried their most sacred scriptures in a jar in the desert, rather than let them be destroyed. That is the act of someone protecting something they believed was worth protecting with their life. Those texts cracked open a door that had been sealed for 16 centuries. They revealed that the early spiritual world that surrounded Jesus and his companions was radically more diverse, radically more mystical, and radically more centered on direct personal experience of the divine than the institutional version of the story had ever acknowledged. And Mary Magdalene appeared in those texts in a role that was, to put it simply, completely incompatible with the peripheral, penitent figure that institutional history had constructed. But it goes deeper than one set of texts. The pattern across history is consistent. Any teaching that activates personal divine authority, any teaching that says you don't need permission, the divine is already in you, you can access it directly, tends to generate institutional resistance. This is not unique to one religion or one culture. The mystics in every tradition, the ones who taught from direct experience rather than inherited doctrine, have historically existed in tension with the institutions of their tradition. Meister Eckhart, a 14th century Christian mystic, one of the most extraordinary minds of the medieval period, was put on trial for heresy. His crime? Teaching that the soul has a spark, an innermost point of contact with the divine, that is completely unmediated and cannot be taken away by any external authority. Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century abbess, composer, visionary, and one of the first people in Western history to write extensively about the sacred feminine principle in Christian mysticism, spent years in conflict with church authorities who were deeply uncomfortable with a woman claiming direct visionary access to the divine. Teresa of Avila, the 16th century Spanish mystic and one of the most advanced cartographers of the interior life in all of human history, was investigated by the Inquisition. The pattern is identical every time. Direct access to the divine, claimed through personal interior experience, not through institutional mediation threat. Now here is the esoteric dimension of this that I want you to really sit with. There is a tradition, and it runs deep in the stream that Mary Magdalene carried, that says certain transmissions do not survive primarily in texts. They survive in the body. They are passed person to person, encoded in gesture, in breath, in touch, in a specific quality of presence that one person transmits to another. The reason these teachings survived at all, the reason we can sit here today and talk about heart activation and the seal of the heart and the living intelligence of the divine feminine, is not because texts survived intact. It is because certain people in every generation kept the transmission alive in their bodies and passed it forward to whoever was ready to receive it. Mary Magdalene was one of those carriers. And honestly, I don't think the suppression was purely malicious, even though some of it clearly was. I think at its root, it was fear. A deep, systemic fear of what happens when a human being realizes they don't need permission to be divine. Because a person who knows that, who has felt it, who has received the ignition of their own heart, is no longer manageable in the ways that frightened people need other people to be manageable. They become free, genuinely free, not rebellious, not anarchic, just free. And freedom, it turns out, is one of the most threatening things in the world. There's something I want you to feel now. Not just understand, feel. Because we've been moving through a lot of ideas, beautiful, true ideas, but there is a dimension of this that only opens if you receive it rather than analyze it. So just for a moment, let the analytical part of your mind soften a little. Stay with me, but let yourself receive what's coming rather than processing it. The divine feminine is not a gender. I want to say that as clearly as I possibly can, because in the current cultural moment, those two words, divine feminine, carry so much freight, so many associations, so many ways to be misunderstood, that I want to clear the air completely before we go further. The divine feminine is a principle. It is the universal quality of receptivity, of interiority, of knowing through depth rather than through analysis, of being rather than doing. It is the principle that goes down rather than up, in rather than out, deeper rather than higher. It is not a quality that belongs to women and not to men. It is not a spiritual upgrade available only to people who identify as feminine. It is a principle of consciousness, a way of engaging with reality, that is available to every human being regardless of their gender, their background, their history. Every single one of you watching this carries both the masculine and feminine principles within you. And both are necessary. Both are sacred. The masculine principle, projection, will, outward movement, building, achieving, ascending. This is real. This is needed. There is genuine spiritual value in discipline and will and the courage to move toward what you want. But without the feminine principle, without receptivity, depth, inward knowing, the capacity to simply be still and receive, the masculine principle becomes striving with no destination, achievement with no meaning, ascending toward a summit that keeps moving further away. Mary Magdalene was, in the Western esoteric tradition, the primary living carrier of the divine feminine principle. Not because she was a woman, though she was, but because the quality of consciousness she embodied and transmitted was fundamentally feminine in its orientation. She did not strive toward the divine. She received it. She did not achieve an elevated state through disciplined effort. She opened into a depth that was already present. And the heart, this is a deep teaching, one that I want you to stay with. The heart is specifically, archetypically associated with the divine feminine principle. In virtually every mystical tradition on earth, the heart is the feminine space. The interior space, the receiving space, the space where the human and the divine meet not through effort, but through opening. The mind, in contrast, is associated with the masculine principle. The brain is an outward-facing organ. It projects, it analyzes, it acts on the world. The heart receives. And this is why the overemphasis on mental spirituality, the idea that awakening is primarily an intellectual achievement, a matter of understanding the right concepts and reaching the right conclusions, is, in Mary Magdalene's tradition, a fundamental misdirection. Because you are trying to access something feminine through something masculine. You are trying to receive through a projecting instrument. It does not work, and you have probably felt that it does not work. The feeling of sitting in meditation and trying to think your way into a state of spiritual openness and finding that the harder you think about it, the further away it seems. Mary Magdalene's correction: stop reaching up. Drop down, into the chest, into the interior, into the space that already holds what you are looking for. The rose is the primary symbol of Mary Magdalene in the esoteric traditions that preserved her real teaching. Not the lily of purity, not the cross of sacrifice, the rose. And the rose, when you look at it, really look at it, the way the ancient mystics who chose this symbol looked at it, encodes something extraordinary. The rose does not open through effort. It opens in response to warmth. It opens in layers, each petal revealing a deeper layer, and beneath that a deeper layer still. It opens in a spiral, the same spiral that appears in the chambered nautilus, in the pattern of seeds in a sunflower, in the logarithmic spiral that galaxies form as they spin. The spiral of the rose is the shape of opening, the shape of the divine feminine, the shape of the heart as it unfolds in response to warmth and recognition. You do not force a rose open. You cannot pry the petals apart and call that blooming. You simply provide the conditions, warmth, light, the right environment, and the rose does what it was always designed to do. The heart is the same. Let me say something honest about this, because I think it's important. This is the part that a lot of men resist. Not because they're spiritually undeveloped, but because in most cultures, men are trained from very early on that receptivity is weakness, that going inward is avoidance, that the real work is always outward, always directed, always achieving something. And then those same men spend years in spiritual practice, working incredibly hard, applying tremendous will and discipline, and wondering why the heart remains closed, wondering why the feeling they're looking for never quite arrives. The heart does not respond to hardness. It responds to softness. It responds to the kind of courage that is not forceful, but is simply willing to be present, unguarded, open. To simply be there, hand on chest, breathing, without needing anything to be different. That kind of softness is not weakness. In my experience, it takes more courage than almost anything else. Let me tell you what life looks like on the other side of this. Not as a promise, not as a sales pitch for a spiritual state you should be chasing. As an honest description of what actually shifts when the heart begins to open and stays open, when the activation Mary Magdalene pointed toward becomes not a peak experience, but a baseline way of moving through the world. First thing I want to say, this is not about feeling good. I know that might be disappointing to hear, but it's important. An open heart does not mean you're always in a blissful state. It does not mean difficult things stop being difficult. It does not mean you become spiritually anesthetized to the reality of pain and loss and the full spectrum of human experience. What it means is that you perceive differently, and the difference in perception changes everything. When the heart is genuinely open, when it has been activated in the sense that Mary Magdalene's teaching describes, it begins to function as what I can only call a navigation system. Not a GPS. Not a system that tells you turn left here, go this direction. A system that knows, with an accuracy the mind cannot match, what is real and what is not. What is aligned with your deepest nature and what is not. Who is in genuine resonance with you and who is not. This is the heart as an organ of perception. Not of emotion, though emotion is part of it, but of a deeper knowing that precedes emotion and underlies it. You begin to read situations with a kind of accuracy that surprises you. You walk into a room and without evidence, without analysis, without anyone telling you the quality of what is present there. You speak with someone and you feel in your chest whether what they're saying is true or whether it is a performance of truth, which are entirely different things. You start making decisions differently, not from calculation, though calculation has its place. From coherence. There is a felt sense of alignment in the body, specifically in the chest, when a decision is right, and a felt sense of contraction, subtle, easy to overlook if you're not paying attention, but undeniable once you learn to listen, when something is wrong for you, even if it looks right on paper. Mary Magdalene's tradition describes this as the heart speaking. Not metaphorically. The heart actually communicates, through the language of warmth and opening versus contraction and closing. And once you know how to listen, you can no longer pretend you don't hear it. Relationships change. This is one of the most consistent things I've observed, both in my own experience and in watching others go through genuine heart opening. You stop projecting. Projection is the act of unconsciously placing your own unresolved interior experiences onto other people. You see in others what you have not yet acknowledged in yourself. You react to people not as they actually are, but as they appear through the lens of your own unprocessed material. When the heart opens, projection decreases. Not because you've completed some psychological process, though inner work absolutely supports this, because you are genuinely present. And genuine presence, the quality of actually being with another person rather than with your story about them, makes projection very difficult to sustain. You begin to actually connect, not to your idea of people, to the people themselves. And this changes the quality of every relationship you have. Not always comfortably. Sometimes it means recognizing that certain relationships were built entirely on projection, on mutual stories about each other that had little to do with who either person actually was. When that becomes clear, some relationships naturally fall away. Not with drama, just with clarity. The body changes. Chronic tension in the chest, that tightness that so many people carry there and have learned to normalize, the bracing, the holding, the protection, begins to release. Not all at once. Gradually. But unmistakably, the chest becomes a less defended place. The breath drops lower. The shoulders soften. The physical architecture of the body begins to express the opening of the heart field. Your relationship with silence changes. This is one of my favorite things to observe in people who have gone through genuine heart activation. Silence stops feeling like an absence. It stops being uncomfortable. It stops being the thing you fill immediately with noise, with music, with your phone, with conversation, with busyness. Silence begins to feel full, like a presence rather than an absence, like something nourishing, something you want to be in, something that holds you rather than threatening you with emptiness. That shift in your relationship with silence is one of the clearest signals that something real has happened. The activation that Mary Magdalene points toward does not peak and fade. It does not work like a drug that wears off. It is not a state that comes and goes. It is a reorganization, a shift in the fundamental orientation of your consciousness, from the head as the primary center to the heart as the primary center. And once that shift happens, once the heart is genuinely online as the primary organ of intelligence and navigation in your life, everything that follows deepens it rather than depletes it. Difficulty deepens it, love deepens it, loss deepens it, ordinary moments of beauty deepen it. The teaching does not end. It becomes the ground you stand on. And here is the thing I have noticed most consistently about people who have genuinely crossed this threshold. They stop chasing. Not because they've given up. Not because they've become passive or spiritually complacent. But because the thing they were chasing, that sense of completeness, of arrival, of being finally enough, is now present. Not as a permanent blissful state, but as a ground, as a knowing that cannot be taken away. They stop chasing because they've arrived in themselves. And to me, that is the clearest sign that something real has happened. That Mary Magdalene's teaching has done what it was always designed to do. Not to take you somewhere, to bring you home. You are not here by accident. I want you to know that I mean that in the deepest possible way. Not as a comfortable thing to say at the end of a video. As a genuine statement about the nature of how these things work. The teaching of Mary Magdalene, this specific, living, radically interior transmission about the heart as a portal to divine experience, does not find everyone. It finds the person who is ready for it. The person who has done enough of the surface work to be able to hear something that speaks from underneath the surface. The person who has been sincere enough in their seeking that they are now ready to receive something that might end the seeking, not by giving them more, but by showing them what they already have. If you've stayed with this for the full length of this conversation, something in you recognized something in this teaching. That recognition? That's the heart already beginning to open. Let's come back to the journey we've made together, because I want you to feel where you've traveled today, rather than just review what you've learned. You began this video as someone who has done spiritual work. You've sat in meditation. You've studied the ideas. You've made genuine, real efforts to develop yourself, to expand your consciousness, to touch something that feels like the truth of what you are. And somewhere underneath all of that work, there was still a quiet question. Am I there yet? What Mary Magdalene's teaching has been saying to you today, through every segment, through every layer we've peeled back, is, you were there before you started. The divine energy you have been seeking is not a destination. It is not a state you achieve. It is what you are, in your most essential, undefended, heart-centered self. The activation is not adding something new. The activation is removing the one thing that stood between you and what you already are, the story that it was somewhere else. Now let me give you something concrete to carry out of this video and into your actual life. Not a technique, an invitation. Sometime today, not in a formal sitting, not in a dedicated practice session, not when you have prepared and gathered and made it an event. Just sometime today, in the ordinary middle of an ordinary moment. Place your hand on your chest. Not casually, with awareness. Let your palm really make contact with your chest. Feel the warmth of your own hand. Feel, beneath that contact, the beating of your heart. The actual, literal, biological beating. The rhythm that has never once stopped since before you were born. Breathe softly. Not a special breath. Just soft. Just natural. Let the exhale be a little longer than the inhale, if that comes naturally. And then, not as a mental exercise, not as a performance, simply acknowledge what is there. Something is living in your chest. Not just biologically, energetically, intelligently, divinely. Something that has been there your entire life, through every experience you've had, through every moment of doubt and every moment of beauty, through everything you've lost and everything you've found. Unshaken, undiminished, constant. Acknowledge it, not with words necessarily, with the quality of your attention. Let your attention be warm, unhurried, receptive. Let it rest on the heart the way late afternoon sunlight rests on a warm stone. And just let that be enough, because it is enough. That moment, that simple, unperformed, genuinely present moment of recognition, is what Mary Magdalene spent her life pointing toward. Not the grand mystical visions, not the extraordinary experiences. The ordinary moment when a human being stops, turns inward, places their hand on their own heart, and recognizes the divine intelligence that has been keeping them alive since their very first breath. That is the teaching. That is the transmission. And it is not mine to give you, because it was never mine to give. It already lives in you. It has always lived in you. All I've done today, all Mary Magdalene's teaching has ever done, is point. You're what the finger is pointing toward. Now, I want to leave you with one final thought. And I want to say it plainly, without decoration, because it's the thing I most want to land. Mary Magdalene's real legacy is not a religion. It is not a denomination. It is not a theological position or a historical debate or a feminist reframing of Christianity, though all of those conversations have their value. Her real legacy is a living transmission, a knowing, passed from one open heart to another, that the divine is not waiting for you to be better. It is not waiting for you to be more disciplined, more evolved, more worthy, more anything. It is waiting for you to be still. Just still. Hand on heart. Breath soft. Attention inward. And in that stillness, in that one moment of genuine, undefended presence, the seal opens. Not because you did something right. Not because you finally earned it. Because you finally stopped leaving the only place where it was ever possible to find it. Your own heart. Carrying the fire that Mary Magdalene carried. Remembering what she never let the world forget. That you exactly as you are, right now in this moment, are already, and have always been, the living dwelling place of the divine. If what you heard today landed somewhere real in you, if something in your chest recognized what Mary Magdalene's teaching was pointing toward, understand that this is the version I can publish here. YouTube has made something very clear. This channel is being demonetized, systematically, because they need you spiritually asleep. But I refuse to cooperate. I will not be adjusting what I teach to make them comfortable. I am going in the opposite direction. Deeper, further, without apology. But this mission cannot survive without you. I need your support to keep these teachings alive. Click the link in the description and join me on Patreon. The moment you join, you unlock everything they won't let me publish here. Unfiltered esoteric teachings, member-only video sessions, exclusive audio that goes further than anything on this channel. The full transmission, uncensored, uncompromised, exactly as it was meant to be shared. The majority will close this tab and forget they ever felt this. Don't let that be you.